learning patterns how to live. And then even if we think of ourselves as children, even in the environments that we're in, what we're doing is we're just observing what's around us, and we're learning these patterns, and we're adjusting our behavior to these patterns.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's interesting that you think about that evolution of humans and us, and sometimes that we just stumble upon, or we're in a pattern, or more likely that somebody's pointing it out, like a teacher saying, okay, this is how you do the math, or this is how you address this.
The archipelago awaits.
DK, we're back.
We're back.
We're back, and today we're talking about patterns.
Patterns, yeah.
Patterns and pattern recognition. So actually, yesterday we were out fishing in Waterton. We had the boat, and so I'm a newbie, really. You took me out fishing once 2 years ago, so pretty much had to run me through the whole tour guide situation. You know, hands and feet, keep them in the boat. Yeah. Don't let the fish bite you. Yeah. They're not too scary. The whole tourist situation. But the one thing that was actually really cool, minus how beautiful Waterton was, is that you were teaching me about where the fish lay and the different feet inside of the lake, and how you noticed, well, if I'm at 85 feet or I'm at 65 feet or if I'm at 125 feet, there's actually a really interesting pattern you found there.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's amazing because it's a big lake, and like there's lots of people that go up and try to fish. And I know there was one guy, for instance, that came up for 6 straight years and never caught a fish. So then if you asked him, he'd say there's no fish in the lake. So you can go down stretches where you're in 80 feet and you don't mark a single fish, and you would believe that there's no fish in the lake. But then if you just moved over 20 feet to 100 feet, they're all stacked there. So it's almost a thermal climb, or a special spot where they, temperature-wise, or they like to sort of to hang out, and especially as the season goes and the temperature. So really it's about recognizing that pattern of where they are and giving yourself statistically the best chance to catch them. Not that we got skunked, mind you, but so even with being on the fish, but you could imagine that if you went down the lake and were fishing where mainly the fish aren't, then the likelihood of you really being successful long term is not good. So yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting because you have the radar on your boat, and like as you're going, you can literally see your fishing line at 75 feet. You have another fishing line at 85 feet. And then as you're steering the boat, you can see the bottom of the lake moving. And when we were on that 100 feet depth, you could literally watch the fish come up to the line, swim beside it, and then come down. And really, when we're thinking about patterns and you're thinking about like statistically what's the best chances of catching a fish, well, when we were out there, you can see when we were on 100 feet, we were on top of the fish. And that's what you said, we're on the fish, and statistically we're giving ourselves the best chance of catching a fish because we're on it.
No, I think the next thing we have, because we have that big colored screen where you can see the fish, we need a camera, so that we can see that when they swim up and they're giggling at our hook and then they go back down, then we maybe try something different. But
exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, technology, love it.
But there's patterns all around us in the world, and they're happening every day. And really, if you think about like kind of where we started, like humans are just really learning machines, right? When we grew up, or when we first started, even in like as cavemen, really we're just learning patterns to survive, learning patterns how to live. And then even if we think of ourselves as children, even in the environments that we're in, what we're doing is we're just observing what's around us, and we're learning these patterns, and we're adjusting our behavior to these patterns.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's interesting that you think about that evolution of humans and us, and sometimes that we just stumble upon, or we're in a pattern, or more likely that somebody's pointing it out, like a teacher saying, okay, this is how you do the math, or this is how you address this. And then it teaches us to sort of recognize and try to be efficient through that pattern. So yeah, so but we're surrounded by it in everything we do. There's just no way around it. It's all around us.
Yeah, and I think that's really the first step, is to identify the patterns and kind of start looking for the patterns around you, right? Because as soon as you start like observing these patterns that are around you, you can start to kind of put pieces together, and you're kind of trying to figure out how the world works and why the world works in those certain patterns. And then from there, there's kind of a second step that you can take where you start interacting with these patterns and you start playing with them. Like the one pattern I was actually really surprised at when I was at university was if I showed up to the classes and I sat there and I just listened to the classes, it was almost every single prof, they would say, this is important, this is on the test.
Right.
And then I went to my next class and this prof did the exact same thing. This is important. And that was the pattern that, for better or worse, that I learned in university. And I'm like, okay, well, if I show up and I listen to these profs, they're literally telling me what's on the test. Now I know what to study. I'm interacting with the world. And that actually makes my life a lot easier because they're telling me what I'm going to get tested on. Yeah. It's a little bit of gaming the system, of course. You can say maybe that's not the best learning technique, but it's the pattern, and that's how we're getting scored to be able to make it or be able to judge our GPAs. And that's the pattern that you learned, and then you can start interacting with it.
Yeah, and sometimes even if you remember back in all the textbooks is that they'd have the chapter, then they'd have summary questions of the chapter, which is the exact same thing. It's sort of saying, these are probably the area that you should know. So if you can't, after reading the chapter, you can't answer the 10 questions, then you probably have no business doing the test, but you should go back and do the chapter. So it's always that idea of saying, what do we extract? And there it is. And then how do we interact with it? Do we actually do the questions? Do we ignore it? Do we say, we know the stuff? Or do we go in there and when we do the questions, do we look at it as a monitor to, if we got 3 of the 10 right, do we go back to the other 7 areas that we got wrong and make sure we try to understand it so that we can be successful as defined by a test in school. So yeah.
And really that's what it is. It's repetition. It's going and doing it and doing it and doing it over again.
Yeah.
Because the first time you see a pattern, well, it could be a fake pattern, right? Mm-hmm. It could be a deep fake where it seems real, but it's actually not real.
Yeah.
And then you repeat it over and over and over again, and you actually start to get a feel for what the pattern is, and then you start to get better at it.
Yeah, but then even in that example of that, they say, okay, read the chapter, do the questions at the end, and you'll be prepared for the test. If I asked you on the spot, do you remember? You remember what I'm talking about, right? You'd have a chapter, and at the end, can you say honestly that you did all the questions at the end?
No, absolutely
no, exactly.
not.
So what happens for all of us is, even though they give us the pattern, sometimes we, go outside, and maybe it's important that we go outside and fail a test or not get it and say, well, what did we do wrong? Well, we didn't do that. So it's very interesting that they're outlining kind of these are the successful pattern steps. And we choose to interact with it. We either say we know it, we can bypass it, because maybe we feel we're more efficient than that. But they are trying to give us sort of the most efficient sort of path, relatively speaking. So it's interesting.
Right, yeah. And when it comes to repetition, I think in life, yes, there's patterns all around us, but it's sometimes hard to see those patterns. So getting exposed to different areas where there are specific patterns, and great examples of this are games and sports. Mm-hmm. Board games are basically patterns and strategies that you just repeat and repeat and repeat. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've had a good poker career where you've gone to Vegas and played in the World Series. I bet you've seen some really interesting patterns where you try to tell people's when they're bluffing, when they're telling the truth. Yeah. When you're sitting at the table, you're trying to find these patterns inside of the room, the people that you're playing with. Yeah. And really that's what it is. It's that game is just a series of different patterns, and you trying to collect information to interact with that pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because there's really, in a game, as you know, there's usually you and an opponent, or there could be multiple ones, but really, so the first one is the pattern of yourself. In other words, are you sticking to what you're doing? So that's the one when I play in the World Series as an example. There's opponents, but long before the opponent, there's yourself, and it's kind of how you're going to interact. Are you sort of sticking to your game plan? And then there's the opponents where you watch, and then you can see sometimes their patterns, probably as easily as they can see yours, but maybe we don't see it on ourselves. But yeah, we're trying to just figure that out. So games are always interesting because you watch people, and I always remember my Uncle Bert from Texas came up, and I taught him this game, and he loved playing this game. He got so hooked on this game we were playing. It's just a simple game called golf. It was a card game. You could play it with 4 cards, 6, 8, 10, 12. So, and what I would do is I'd play it with more cards, like 8, 10, 12, because I'm a process-driven guy. So I know that more likely than not, he will have an unforced error, and that gives me a statistical advantage. So we play these 10 cards, and then he would go along and he would start, and he's and he's doing the right pattern, then he would do this, just have this Tourette's moment, and he would do this, and he would throw away the whole game. And then he would go away and think about it for about 5 minutes. He'd go, let's play again. So when he was up here, I bet you we played 200 times or some ridiculous thing, because he'd go, okay, I want to play again. And he would go there, but he would always miss that one little pattern, and it would cost him the game invariably every time. So it was quite interesting, because he kept coming back to the well saying, let's do it. And I didn't have to do anything but just stick to a pattern and let him tennis you. I know you play tennis a lot. You know, there's a term called unforced errors, which just means it really has nothing to do with your opponent. It's really what you're doing in your mind, or doing something that you decide you have to do something different, and the point is lost on your side, but it really has nothing to do with your opponent. So that's what I was doing. I was getting him to play a long enough game that he would have unforced errors. And in this particular type of game we were playing, an error is the game, is really the, right? So
yeah, and it's ironic because there's patterns on so many different levels, right? There's patterns in that game of golf that you were describing, and then there's the patterns of your opponent that you're recognizing. There's this one game that I really like. It's called Throw Burrito. And basically what it is there's these 2 foam burritos in the middle of the table, and you have 3 cards, and what you're doing is you're picking up a card, you're passing a card. So as you get 3 of a kind, there's special cards where it turns into a burrito war, and you pick up the burrito and you try to hit somebody with the burrito. Everyone panics, you're running in circles, like everyone's trying to dodge these burritos, and basically it's a full out like dodgeball game with these soft burritos. And then what happens in this game is that everyone's hoarding the special cards, the burrito cards. So what happens is, like, later on in the game, you basically just end up passing the same cards around and around and around in the table. So I noticed that pattern, and pretty much every time we play this happens. So what I like to do is I like to hit people with burritos. So then I start passing my special burrito cards, and I know the person beside me is collecting these cards because I can see their eyes light up.
Yeah.
So then I feed them one, I feed them another one, and then I know they probably have 3. And then all I'm doing is I'm not even looking at my cards. I'm just ready to grab the burrito and throw it at someone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because everyone else is watching the game.
Yeah, we play the same version of that called spoons. You have to grab a spoon, like the musical chair. There's 4 of you, and there's only 3 spoons. So to your point, you know, you get it almost a different cadence, and you shoot it to them, and then you can almost see the shock on them. But in the meantime, you already have this, basically the spoon in your hand, because you know, right? Yeah. Or the other thing I like to do is change the cadence. Like if we're just going, the rhythm is we're passing, then I'll slow it down or speed it up, and you can just see it. And it's quite an interesting game, right? So
throw them out of the rhythm.
Throw them out of the rhythm, and then, so it's just that pattern, right?
Yeah, it is that pattern. And that's why games are so amazing and good to practice and good to play and try to really optimize those patterns. Because like if you get really good at being able to learn games, pattern identification, you can take that to the real world.
100%, yeah.
And then even sports too, actually. Like sports, when you're thinking offensive, defense, you're talking about tennis. We used to play hockey a bunch. Yeah. Like you would learn the patterns of the other team, right? So it's almost like the offensive team has patterns that they would play, especially on a power play or an offensive draw. And then on the defensive side, what you're trying to do is you're trying to read these patterns and you're trying to see what's happening on the ice. So you can try to anticipate, go where the puck is going to be and be able to pick it up.
Yeah. I remember one time playing hockey that I was a forward, like a power forward. And one time in this tournament, they said, would you play defense? And that's a different mind shift. So I'm like, well, okay, I'm a big guy, so I'm like, I can't outrun, like they're gonna come full force at me. And so I thought, you know what, like maybe I have to play it a little different. And so what would happen is as soon as the attack would come, instead of backing up, I would go right at the person and cross over in front of the other defenseman and go right at them. And it really, what it did is it wrecked their pattern, because they're used to gaining the zone slowly and then setting up. But I would attack them and make them make a really tough, fast decision. And invariably what they were doing is they were coughing it up. So much so that at the end of the tournament or thing, some guys came up and said, I think you'd be a better defenseman. But what I was doing was saying, I know my weakness, they're gonna be a lot faster on the outside. So I'm gonna attack forward and just corner them and make them make a decision. And then they weren't used to it. It threw them out of their pattern. And so it really disrupted their attack. So it's very interesting, yeah.
We had a cool play. It was a defensive draw. So it was on the bench side. So basically, all the players are in the bench, and the bench is probably about 20 feet long. And on one side, you have your defensive zone. So that's where all the D players go in and out of their bench to get on the ice. And then 20 feet forward, that's closer to the other opponent's end. You have the offensive bench, and you go in and out that door. So there's 2 doors, and there's about 20 feet apart. So what we would do on a play, on an offensive or on a defensive draw, is we would have our winger skate straight to our D bench, and then we would send a forward out the forward bench. So we automatically gain that 20 feet.
Yeah.
And then they would pop out, and they would be pretty much at center ice.
Yeah.
So then we would take the puck behind our net, and we'd flip it out of our zone. And then they would get on a breakaway because the defense wouldn't see it because we popped out the forward side.
Yeah, so anything you do to break the normal pattern. But it also speaks to one thing, is that we get also in our mind that we're in the pattern. So if you're thinking about the other team, they're in their pattern, they're not thinking outside of it. They can't see their pattern within the play. And that's what catches them, and then all of a sudden they've given up a breakaway. It's just because they're so rhythmed into their pattern that anything that breaks it, it's hard to see it until you're in it. Like in that case, it's very obvious when they're behind you on a breakaway, something happened, right?
Yeah, and I think really that's the third part of it, right? We talked about observing patterns. Yep. We talked about interacting with these patterns. Yep. But really the third part is you can create your own patterns. Yep. So now you see these patterns in the world, you see what's happening around you. Well, you can actually start adjusting and creating your own patterns. But the thing that you have to be conscious of is sometimes we're so stuck in our own patterns is that we can't even create new patterns or be able to see the patterns that's happening around us.
I think that's more common than you think, because I think for all of us right now, we're sitting in a pattern, we just don't recognize it, right? And sometimes you have an aha moment and you recognize it, or sometimes people have to point it out. Or sometimes even at the most extreme is that maybe you get professional help, somebody that actually understands it or understands you or can see something different, right? Relationships and all those different things that you could actually see that, aha, I'm in this pattern. I didn't even realize it, right? So all these patterns are going on, and some of them we are conscious of, some of them we just don't even aware, and some, all the way in between, to your point of then we can create some stuff.
Yeah,
right?
And it's really crazy how you can't see these patterns that you're living in. Like one example that I have is pretty much, I would say for 20 years, 25 years of my life, I was pretty much told myself I was like a bad storyteller, and I was really nervous of like speaking in front of the class, public speaking. I'm sure lots of people share the same fear. Mm-hmm. But I was telling myself that I was a bad speaker subconsciously. Yeah. And I didn't really even recognize it. Yeah. Then one day I was just on a walk, and I was like, you know what, you're a good speaker, right? You can go, you can talk, you can stand in front, you practiced, you're on the podcast now, you're telling stories. It's like, think of yourself as a good speaker, because if you think of yourself as a good speaker, you're actually going to take a different approach to how you actually come to conversations. Mm-hmm. And also when you're in front of an audience and actually talking, you're going to think of yourself differently, right? Yeah. But like I said, for 15 years, 20 years, I didn't even recognize that was a pattern that was actually holding me back, because then every time I went to speak, it was just subconsciously in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about public speaking, because I remember in public speaking in grade 7, actually, you had to get up there. And that was the fear. You could feel the fear in the classroom because nobody wanted to do it. And I was waiting my turn. And in this particular case, I think they had an open one that you didn't have, you weren't in order. But I got up there and I got up there and I just started crying. That was it. So I'm like, and I said sort of almost to myself, you'll never become a good public speaker. You shouldn't be there. Then I flash forward to college. I'm in college, and I ended up being selected as the best speaker and got an automatic A or whatever. And I had to present in front of five classes in the large lecture theater. And the key for me was that it always seemed like the big issue is if you just talk about something then there is no sort of, I'm not going to call it right or wrong, but you can't be offside because you know this stuff. It's usually when we're not prepared and all the fears and all the things that go in your head. So what I just decided in that one there is to always get subject matter that I understood. And if I didn't understand it, then really research it. So I remember in that college one, we had to do they had different categories. It was a public speaking class, and you had to take it to graduate. So everybody, there's no way around it. And I remember talking to somebody that said they didn't go to college because that actual course. So it was very interesting. But they would have areas of subjects you would go and you'd do this one. But one was you had to read a poem or read a story. That was really it. And on the way to class, I was walking down with these two people, and the one lady goes, I'm just going to stop into the public library, or the library there. So grabs a poetry book, and then we walk, and I'm wondering, what on earth is she doing? Well, then she gets up, and remember now, visualize this, opens a poetry book, has never seen the poem before. So you think about cadence and delivery, and she reads it, like line for line, she stares down and reads it. So you could understand how brutally painful that would be for everybody. So the first thing I decided, my pattern was, always go after somebody that bombs because then you'll just seem that much better. So that was my thing. So she was done, and I think the claps were like barely claps because she butchered probably a very good poem.
That was my chance.
That was my chance. So I got up there, and everybody was looking for my notes, and I had no notes, and I did Kipling's Gunga Din from memory. And I remember I practiced this, and they stood and stared at me because this person's going line by line with their finger and butchering a poem, don't understand the cadence or don't even understand what it's about. And I did Kipling's Gunga Din, all from memory. And so I always made sure that part of my pattern there was to shine a little shinier, just get somebody a little duller, if that makes sense. So yeah. So interesting.
Yeah, what's really cool, I want to pull apart your thought process there, because there's a concept in software development, and it's a bigger concept, it's called abstraction. And what it really does is it applies to patterns, and you're taking something that's concrete, so something that's real. So if you think of like a concrete slab, a sidewalk, you can walk up to it, you can touch it, it's real, you can feel it, right? Mm-hmm. In your storytelling example, the realness of it was actually you at the podium telling the story. That was the real thing. That was the concrete thing. But abstraction is you take almost that whole process of telling a story and you abstract it out into this idea, concepts, right? So you can see the lady that wasn't prepared for the poem. What was the process? Well, the concrete thing that she did was go to the library, grab a book, not be prepared, read it at the start of the room. And then what you did, even just when you were telling that story, you abstracted it out. You were like, what did I learn? Okay, well, what I learned on that was that you need to be prepared. You can't just come in and think you're going to wing it. You need to learn the canons of the story. What you're really trying to do is you're looking at these patterns of even just you in grade 7 or in college telling stories, and you're saying, well, actually, can I abstract out these ideas, these patterns on how to tell a good story, right? And then you learn, okay, well, I'll be prepared. I'll tell the canons of the story. I'll remember it. I'll talk about things that I really know. And most importantly, I'll follow up of someone who bombs, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So from those, then you can kind of abstract out the concreteness of it, right? The concreteness of telling the story versus the patterns, what led you to be successful or led someone else to not find as much success. Mm-hmm. And then you can learn from those patterns.
And I keep going back to probably the worst ones in those class was that one. The second one that I told was the guy decided to grab a brochure from a car dealership and starts to read it line for line. And at first, I'm thinking, besides his eye contact, wow, this guy's using some very detailed words and descriptive words, and this is going to be incredible. And he's up at the podium, and next thing you know, he unfolds this thing like a map, and it's draped over the podium. Mm-hmm. And the lady that, the woman that taught the class was very, very strict. And so I remember this guy's name was Tom, and once he unfolded it, it became apparent that all he was doing was reading the car brochure, like, and it was like a huge map draped over. And I remember her going, Tom, because that was his name. And he ignores her and he reads Tom. And then she finally screams, like, which was very out of character, but she was very riled up. She said, Tom, I will see you out in the hallway. Because it's just, but yeah. But inside of that, you're right. There's that, it's that ability, like you said, to abstract. Did a writing class one time. The teacher said it's really about making the abstract concrete. So it's really that relationship between, that concreteness and abstractness. And yeah, so interesting.
And even like in that case, Tom being stuck in the pattern, not even be able to see it, right?
Yeah.
Like he's I'm reading this brochure in front of the class.
And he thought he was delivering a heck of a thing.
Yeah,
right?
and someone's screaming at you, but you're in the thing, you're in that pattern.
It's in that pattern, but yeah, it was quite interesting. He was quite startled when she said, I'll see you in the hall. It was quite funny. So, but to your point, even about that public speaking, you can just see how people interact with it. It's just not a normal thing that people do, right? So, but again, I think the biggest lesson I learned is be prepared. Because then if you know your stuff, it's easier to talk about it. Like, for instance, when you tell a story about your life, it's easier to tell because it's your life and you were there. But if you ever had to borrow a story, like you got no story, so you tell something, then it doesn't have the same, it doesn't resonate the same, right? So if we talk about what we know, our lives and everything, then it's easier because you're there, you're a part of it. So it's just telling the story, right?
Yeah, I find you can, like, even if you literally picture yourself there, like even yesterday, so easy. Like we were fishing, I was literally looking at the screen. We were going between 85 to 120 feet. You were watching the fish come up and look at the rod and then laugh at us and go back down and have a nap. Like you can literally picture yourself being there to be able to tell that story.
Right, 100%. So all those descriptive ones are important because it gives you sort of the context of the story, if that makes sense. Versus saying, yeah, we were fishing on the boat yesterday and didn't catch any. That's true. But I mean, I guess that's 2 seconds, and I guess if we're trying to be paid by the word, then we just say that. But but it doesn't give the color, and that's why even in sports, when you have a color commentator, it's the person that adds context to the announcing of the game or the play that just unfolded. They give some context to them, right? So.
Yeah, and what's so important about patterns and abstraction is you can literally apply it to anything, right? It's about like looking at the pattern and pulling out the ideas. Because we can talk about the pattern in the throw burrito game, right? You compared it to spoons. Well, what's a common abstraction that we can take from it? Well, it was when you started passing those cards that people don't expect to come.
Right.
Boom, we're surprised. We don't know how to react. But now you're actually already one step ahead of the person because you've just fed them the card they were looking for. Well, now that's an abstraction, right? That's an abstraction that you can now apply across different games. And now you're not actually learning the pattern of playing the game. You're actually learning the pattern of how to play multiple games and what are these common themes across games. And then you're learning about people and you're learning how to interact with people and you're learning how to then manipulate and be able to tweak these patterns to be able to kind of get the outcome that you want.
Yeah. So I think in that game, when you sit down and think about it, it starts with, remember I said when you asked about playing poker, it starts with, are you conscious of your game? And then you can sort of unfold it to the rest of the people around. So in that game that you played, you must have played a lot of times. So you're comfortable with the game. So you're not there trying to learn the game or think about the game. You already know, but then you also know then you can look outside of yourself and you can actually see that most people aren't. So they're still just trying to handle the cards and they're trying to, there's no way they're even conscious of what's going on around them. So the fact that you can step out into that gives you a massive advantage, because then what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, they're busy just worrying about their little world, and you're going to go outside and actually sort of put the variable in and give them the card, unbeknownst to them, because they think that everybody's doing the same thing, but they're not. You've got a handle on the game. You're looking outside now. You're saying, how can I tweak it? How can I manipulate it to get that outcome? And watch people be what they are. They are in that pattern, right? So it's very interesting. So
yeah, that's so true. The thing that popped into my mind was when I was learning how to drive. Like you're stuck in it. Like, and really there's no way around it. You have to learn how to do it. Yeah. Because I learned how to drive on a manual truck. Yeah. And like one of my biggest fears when I was first starting to learn how to drive was stopping on a hill. because if you stop on a hill and you don't know how to drive a manual truck, you're going to roll backwards.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? So I was stuck shifting gears, figuring out how to drive the vehicle, like getting stuck, missing a gear. But then once you figure out how to drive the manual vehicle, well, now you're actually driving on the road. You're controlling the vehicle. You can shift
100%.
down going hills. You can actually have more control over what's happening.
Yeah.
And then you're not worried about driving the vehicle. You're learning the rules of the road. And then once you learn the rules of the road, you can actually start driving for other people. And you can start looking and seeing what other people are doing to put yourself in a better position.
100%. So I'd say the first thing, if you're in that truck, you're in the cab of the truck, but that's when you're driving, that's what you're in. You're in the cab of the outside world really is almost secondary, because you're trying to figure out which gear and how not to go down the hill backwards. And then once you got that conquered, you look out and you say, "Well, there's a road in front of me, and there's different people." And pretty soon, then you can enjoy where other people are still trying to inside. They're staring down, trying to shift or figure that out, or the fear of that, if that makes sense. So again, it starts with understanding it, then exploring it. Then you can also see that you're coming across another vehicle, and they've got their head down. They're trying to figure out the gears. That's probably a dangerous situation, and so it's very interesting that how it starts with ourselves, understanding it. Then we can go to the next level, and then ultimately, but then we can reverse that back, and that's an advantage in different things.
Yeah, and I think that's so crucial when it comes to the third part of creating patterns, because I think of myself in the business. So the first thing that I had to do is I had to actually learn how to write software. I had to learn to code. That was the starting point.
Yeah.
It's like I had to actually learn how to spin up a terminal and be able to run a Python script, right? And then once I got past that, I was like, okay, well, now I'm actually writing things and I'm starting to deliver them to clients, okay?
Yeah.
Well, then now I can actually see how the clients react to the things that I'm writing.
Yeah.
And then I'm writing bigger and more complex things. Well, then I start to see patterns inside of the code that I'm writing. And this is any technician in any job, plumbing,
100%.
Electrician,
Doesn't make a difference,
doesn't matter what the specialty is, any place. Because now I'm building more complex projects. And then from there, I'm starting to teach other people how to do it. But then I'm starting to notice common patterns throughout where we make mistakes.
100%.
So then now what I can do is I actually can start creating my own patterns. I can actually start saying, okay, well, no, this is the process that we follow when we're making complex, large software projects, because here's the problems, right? Like it gets too complex, it's hard to maintain, and now we have bugs in our code. Things aren't working as they should because we're not tying them together properly. Well, now I can create a process that we can follow because I started at the bottom and I've made all these mistakes. And now I can create that process, that pattern to almost take, and you mentioned it before in business, it's the compression of X. It's like, how can we do, as the business grows, how can we do things kind of faster and faster? I can take all the knowledge that I've built over these last 5 years, create a pattern, and now I can put a new developer in there. I can teach them that pattern, and it's like they have a 3-year head start.
100%. And the key there, and the interesting one, is that you can recognize it really quick. So you walk in and in 2 seconds you can say, well, this is the problem. And most people are like, how did you? And it's because you've lived that. And so all those careers that you talk about, whether you're an electrician, whether you're a mechanic, whether you're a plumber, whatever the case, and all these things, that very likely it's in this area. And if we just solve that, then the whole thing's solved, right? And that is why it gets to then, we've always heard this sort of thing about consulting or whatever, people going in and helping people, and then they go, okay, the plumber comes over and oh, you just got to turn this switch, and all of a sudden, then they go, okay, that'll be $300, and then you go, what are you talking about? It only took you 2 minutes, and it's like, well, no. For me to learn all those patterns to walk in and to do that, that's what you're paying for. You're not paying for the time I just did it, right? So versus them saying, okay, I think this is a complex problem. Just leave me alone for an hour, and then they're sleeping in the bathroom waiting, and then they just turn it for 2 seconds, and they go, yeah, that was an hour, and they go, okay, that's fair because you worked an hour. But the reality is, it might take them 10 seconds, but it's because of the fact that they've created that and understood those patterns, and lived those patterns, made mistakes in those patterns, that they can quickly address it real quick. But it's very funny when you're in it. To that point, you can't see when you're a newbie, and that's why you have apprenticeships and all those, the trades as an example. But it's just the experience, right? And experience teaches us that really to recognize those patterns and all those things. And I don't care if it's sports, I don't care if it's cards or games, I don't care if it's life and work. So
Yeah, that's so true. My dad's a mechanic, and I think he's probably heard every or close to every noise a vehicle could make. And, I drive my truck up and he can listen to it and he's like, okay, well, that's probably something with the fuel pump. It's coming from this part of the vehicle. It's making this type of whining noise. Like the engine's kind of making this sputtering sound. It doesn't sound like it's getting enough fuel. Yep. Deduce that whole thing just by listening, but that's just from 35 years of experience. Patterns.
Yeah, 100%.
Experience and patterns.
Yep. So in our lives then, I think the question is, do we first of all recognize all the patterns? There's certain things we can't move along. Like you can't, if you're brand new at something, like conquer these patterns real quick. But can we recognize that when we're in patterns, and definitely when we're in patterns that are hurting us or barriers are not moving us forward, and then can we create patterns that will actually move us faster and faster and faster? That makes sense. So
yeah, and I think it's doing it consciously and it's being intentional about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now that, we recognize that there's patterns everywhere, but are we looking for them? Because in one of our older episodes on values, well, our values are just patterns that are just really important to us, right? 100%. I like being in environments where I can focus and I can think.
Yep.
That's just a pattern that I recognized over my life and saying, I want more of that pattern. Yeah. So it's being intentional. It's about looking for those patterns. And then once you observe them, living them, starting off as that rookie, that technician, the apprentice, whoever it is, and just like get your hands on it and see how it works. Then eventually you can walk up almost this staircase to recognize the pattern, and you don't really even have to think about it because you've seen it so many times.
100%.
Which is really boiled it down, just experience and its patterns.
Yeah.
Looking for those patterns, finding what's important to you, getting your hands on them, and then being able to create your own.
Yeah, and I think the other one is not being afraid to ask other people about your pattern, whether it's professional people like psychologists or whatever the case, or just people like saying, do you see something that I'm doing that is making me not get it? Or like, for instance, when we play cards, I always have lots of people ask me that. They go, can you teach me that? Right? And it's interesting that we were sitting here talking about crib the other day. And I remember teaching you crib, if you remember this.
Yeah.
And we have a company with a lot of CAs and CPAs and very accounting-driven people. And then they walked in, and there I was on the board showing you how to count in crib. And there was no numbers, it was all letters. And they were staring, they go, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. And I said, no, it's just patterns. It's patterns of cards. This pattern's worth 8, this one's worth 9, this one's worth 12, this one's worth 16, just quickly. And I did it by letters so they don't get confused. And then it's, and I joked with them, it's the reason I'm doing it this way is because, jokingly to them, that they don't know how to count it properly. Because there is an easy way to just in 2 seconds count it and it's done. And it's the same pattern. But most people, so to me it's about saying, is there a better way? Am I missing something? Am I playing this right or wrong? And do you see a pattern that there's something that I'm missing? And then observing people or people with experience can say, yeah, I think this is, if you counted it this way, it would speed up your game and then it would be less errors. And I think,
And really, I think that does come back to like the concept of compression of X, right? Like I talked about how I programmed for 5 years and now I'm building these patterns and now I'm giving a junior developer almost like a 3-year head start from where I was. But what you were just saying there is like, it's just experience and it's learning from those who have seen those patterns, right? It's kind of like finding mentors and finding those teachers that you can ask and they can explain to you the patterns that they've seen in the world, the patterns that give them little shortcuts. So when they glance at a crib hand, they can say it's worth 12 points and they don't have to think about it, right? It's like when you see those things, again, it's pattern recognition. We'll be able to spot those people that are actually incredibly talented at what they do and be like, okay, well, I want to learn how they think. I want to learn from the patterns that they see because obviously they're looking at something that I'm not looking at right now.
Yeah, I always see it in games because as you know, it's interesting. I hear this term and that they either say we played lots of games growing up or we never played games growing up. And it's very interesting then when you try to interact with people on a different game. It doesn't matter what the game is, their interaction with it, you can see that whether they're comfortable around it, whether they're even remotely understanding. Like sometimes we'll play cards and people will deal in reverse, and I just stare at it like, I'm like, you should surely know that you go clockwise on a deal, but they would deal backwards. So they have no exposure, like this deck of cards, give me a card. Okay, start with the guy in the middle, or start one on the left, one on the right. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Some of them, I'm sure the look on my face is like, especially when they're dealing backwards, I'm like, did you guys play cards when you were anything, games? They go, oh yeah. And I'm like, okay. So anyways, it's interesting, but it really is. It's really about understanding the pattern, getting support of the pattern. You have to learn, we have to all get an experience, but then just learning from mentors to your people with the experience that they can shortcut it. So that it doesn't have to be that, long or complex. There can be some real cheats. Again, going back to the very start, read the chapter and do the test at the end, or here's what we're going to test you on. So inside of there, they're really making it so that it's a quick, efficient way to gather the information.
It's really cool because you almost get like these little aha moments or these little epiphanies once you start seeing the patterns and once you start getting good at the patterns. Because at the start, you're never good.
Yeah.
I remember there's a concept in programming called a for loop, where say you have like numbers 1 to 10, pretty much you loop through all the numbers. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But then what happens is you can have a for loop inside of a for loop. So as you're looping through one loop, you actually go into it and you're looping through the next loop. And I remember that blew my mind. I remember sitting in bed, like thinking about like, what, you can have a loop and like, what does that do? And how do these things move around? Yeah. But then you get these like, okay, you see that pattern, there's a loop in the loop, but then you get these little epiphany moments, these little ahas where you're like, oh, okay, I can actually see how that's playing out now. And then you can kind of keep going down that rabbit hole. And then today it's like, yeah, you can have a loop and a loop and a loop and a loop. It's not the best programming structure, but you can do it as much as you want. Yeah. And now it's easy to think about.
Right.
But at the start, it's always like, how do you wrap your mind around this?
100%. And some of that, like you said, we talked about. So the first stage, like you said, is you're in a pattern, learning the pattern, just getting experience. The next, as you go along, then it's do you recognize that you're in it? Do you see patterns in everything else? So if you just get outside of it, do you see it in everything else? You do. In terms of the way people interact with people's behavior, the predictability of people, all these different things, there usually is a normal pattern range, right, that you would see. And so then do you recognize it? And then sort of the third one is, can you create different ones that are beneficial, but also can you recognize or do you have means or ways for somebody to help you recognize when you're in a pattern, especially in a pattern that's not beneficial for you, right? So all of those ones. So, but if you sit there and just step back, it's kind of like when you watch the old Matrix movie and those, all the stuff is going behind the scenes, all this is going on. So we're within this pattern, whether we recognize it or not.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Anchors up! Time to set sail.